Morgan, on Thursday night you played a headlining show in London. Last night you kicked off this run opening for Brad Paisley in Glasgow. How did you find the shows? I was looking at clips of you playing on socials and you look like you were on cloud nine, man.
It's so good to be back here. You know, after the last couple of years not being able to play for a long time, and then when we did go out to play, you were always wondering if it was going to get cancelled and all that. It felt really good, and especially that London show. We haven't really been doing much headlining stuff this year. It's been a lot of one-off kind of festivals and stuff like that, and we start headlining when we get back. So that was a really kind of cool thing to do that in London and have a bunch of people there singing. My judge is always the second verse. If they know the second verse, they're hardcore, you know, and it really felt like that. It was a great energy in there that night.
Growing up, obviously, in Australia, it would have been around the early noughties when you really threw yourself into country music. Brad Paisley in particular, it must be fairly surreal to be on the road with him. But I'll ask you, as a guy from Australia and myself from Ireland, you know, country music, as I'm sure you're aware at times, can be fairly American specific. Right. What do you think it is about Brad's music that over the decades has really resonated to people like, you know, yourself and me?
You're right. It's funny, some country music acts only work in America. But someone like Brad, man, I think... You know, it's funny. I feel like country music fans here are similar to Australia, and they're like, there's that moment that the door opened, because it's not something you can just stumble across as easily here or in Australia. And so my version of that was when I saw Keith Urban play, as you say, in the early noughties in my hometown. My mum dragged me along to a show, and it was the music, obviously the stories and the lyrics too, but it was the music. And so inevitably, when I started going down the Keith Urban rabbit hole and the guitar playing rabbit hole, who's the very next person you discover was Brad Paisley. And I think that musicality would just translate beyond any language or any words. And man, he's the king. Watching him play last night was just like, oh my God, he's so good. And man, it's just such an honor to be out here with him.
So the last time you played over here was September of 2019. You played the Green Room at the Academy, and it was just yourself, a guitar and a loop pedal. This time you've got a full band. How does the dynamic differ then between yourself and the audience when you're solo or you've got the band with you?
It's super different. Obviously, same songs. We've got some new songs since then, but same music and same approach generally, but I don't have to play the drums or the bass. And, you know, I have a guitar player that helps me out with some of that stuff too. So I can actually just be in the moment more, which I didn't realize how much I missed that. You know, the loop pedal was really special because it was just me and whoever came to the show. But I had this kind of realization during the pandemic, and I think a lot of people did. They had all that time off, and they were like, hang on a second. How am I spending my life? What do I actually want to do? And all I wanted to do when I was 13 was play guitar in a band. Yeah. And so during the pandemic, I decided I really want to play guitar in a band again. And man, I feel like I'm a little kid when I get on stage again now, and hopefully people will kind of feel that energy as well.
Yeah, you got your first guitar when you were 13 and you formed a band with your best friend who played drums, and then you roped in your brother to play bass. Talk to me about those times, as in how important were they to you? Because funny, Keith Urban had said to me about like the days when he was out just playing pubs around Australia and all they want is covers, and you start the show and they've all got their arms crossed and they go, show me what you've got. How important were those days in your development as a musician, and also just the fundamentals of learning to capture the audience's attention and hold a room?
So important. You can look back on those days and be like, oh, geez, that was a grind. And, you know, in a lot of ways it was. You know, didn't sleep that much. And all the same pubs that Keith played, I'm sure we played them as well, you know. I don't think there's many pubs in Australia we didn't hit. And I think it's similar here. It's like a little bit rock and roll in the way that you got to show up and you got to kind of prove yourself everywhere you go. Whereas I think, certainly on the country music circuit in America, I feel like people show up ready to embrace you. Whereas I feel like in Australia and here, they may be like, all right, what's this guy got? But then once you make the connection, it's on. And I think I have that conversation with a lot of American folks that come here and come to Australia to play. It's like, well, hang on, they seemed a little like, I don't know if they were enjoying it at the start. I was like, no, they were just waiting to see, you know, it was going to be great. And yeah, in moments like that, just, you know, all those years of like, okay, I'm here to play. This is what I do. That's definitely a skill and a sort of, I don't know, some sort of surface layer or something that you build up or something. But yeah, man, I'm grateful that I did all those years in the bars, and those kind of, whatever you call them, skills, techniques, or just memories come back all the time.
In October of last year, you put out this 6-track EP, The Country and the Coast Side A. You worked with Dan Huff and Jimmy Robbins, obviously with your love and admiration for Keith Urban. To work with Dan Huff must have been a thrill. Talk to me about working with those two guys, as in like how their approaches, how their styles differ in the studio, and what do you think they each were able to bring out within your sound?
Yeah, firstly, you're extremely well researched. You know, when I moved to Nashville and I started coming to Nashville and realized, you know, the sound of all the records that I was loving at that time, so many of them were produced by Dan, especially the late 90s, early 2000s, that time when like country music was moving from that really super traditional in the 90s to like the maybe like a little bit elements of rock and roll coming in. And he was really part of that whole thing. And even back to the Shania records, he's playing guitar and all those things, you know. So getting to work with him was really cool. And
Intimidating at all?
he's intimidatingly talented. And I will say, he's a lovely guy to be around and extremely talented. But we sat down for like 6 hours one day, just kind of going through guitar parts and writing guitar parts and stuff like that. Even though I was working with Dan, I really wanted to sound like my record, you know? And that was awesome. And then watching him sort of direct a band in the studio was like, I mean, I'm getting pretty sort of behind the curtain kind of nerdy right now, but it was just something to behold. And every musician respects him so, so much that it's just like the whole thing just rises to a new level. And I love that element of it. And Jimmy, he's like just a really good friend of Kelsea and I's, and like one of the best songwriters in the world. And so I feel like I get different music when I work with him than I would with someone else. And so, I mean, he's produced a ton of hits as well. They're both incredible talents, but they bring out different things, and I really enjoyed working with them both.
I want to ask you very quickly about a few standout tracks on the EP. Firstly, Love Is Real, because it's got this chorus that just hits you like a punch. It's so anthemic. I think you wrote that one with Jordan Reynolds and Parker Welling. Tell me how that song came together.
Well, firstly, I think you're just showing off your research at this point. That song was actually, it felt like the beginning of the next thing when lockdown hit. Sorry to keep talking about the pandemic, but that's where all this stuff came from, you know? When that lockdown hit, like everyone kind of scrambled. They're like, what are we going to do? And everyone sort of started writing on Zoom after a few weeks. And I tried it so many times, but I just, again, like I got into this to like feel the energy of other people playing music and seeing what happened when we all did that together. And I wasn't able to do that until I think September, October that year. A bunch of us took COVID tests. We all went to this house in the desert, and we just wrote songs for a week. And that was, I think, the first song that I wrote that week in a spare bedroom in this house in the desert in Palm Springs in California. And I was with Jordan and Parker, as you say, and just the energy of that song. Again, I keep saying energy too. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I didn't sleep much last night, but I had that title for a long time, and there's so many ways you could write that title and try to be clever. But I think with this record and this song, this lyric, this chord progression, melody, all of it, I think we were just trying to capture what that felt like rather than try to be clever. And I think that's why I loved it so much and wanted it to be the first kind of step in this new thing.
I have to say, my favourite song on the EP is American Dream Truck. And not to show off again, you wrote that with Jeff Warburton, Hunter Phelps, Ben Johnson. I've heard that this song sort of came about. You were in a writing session and you just off the cuff mentioned that you had your truck for sale on Craigslist.
I did. If it wasn't for the pandemic, I wouldn't have met them. I actually met them listening to some songs that other people had written, and I loved all the songs they'd written. And so I was like, guys, we should write some songs together. And so the first time we all got together, we wrote Sing Along, Drink Along. And right when we'd finished Sing Along, Drink Along, I was checking my phone because I'd posted my truck for sale. And I showed them, they were like, what are you doing? I was like, I was just making sure this ad posted. And I started telling them about the truck, and they were like, oh yeah, what else? And the more stories I told, I mean, we just started writing a song immediately. And this is the first truck, the first thing that I bought when I moved to America. And so selling it was kind of a hard thing to do, but we had nowhere to park it at the time. And by the time we finished this song, we ended up selling the apartment instead of the truck. And I have to keep the truck now. It's parked at home. And it sounds like a cool story because it's like my first truck and everything, but it's a terrible truck. And I actually used to joke about it because it was nobody's dream truck, but it was the start of my American dream. And so the song's called American Dream Truck.
Another song I want to ask you about, more recently you put out a newer version with Rivers Cuomo from Weezer, Country Out of My Girl. And this came from you. You posted to TikTok a video of you covering their song Island in the Sun. And then the collaboration was born from that.
Yeah, I just got home we went back to Australia for the first time in a couple of years at Christmas. And I got back to Nashville. And Nashville, dude, it was like snowing and icy and just so miserable. And we must have heard that song, Island in the Sun, so much when we were back in Australia. It was a huge song down there. I think it was a huge song everywhere. But I was just messing around with the loop pedal one day, and I just did a version of it and posted it up on TikTok. And I don't know if it was Rivers or Weezer. One of the accounts commented on it. And I was like, that's like the real Weezer, you know? And I actually just started working with new management at the end of last year too. And Rivers reached out through management, and they called me, and they were like, hey, do you want to do a song with Rivers? He loves Country Out of My Girl. I was like, oh, okay. That's not the song I would have picked to do. But he's like, he's already written a verse and chorus. And they sent over the vocals and everything, and we dropped them into the mix, and that's exactly what you hear right now. So as a dude that started playing guitar in the early 2000s, to have a song with Rivers is about as cool as it gets.
So this EP, it's very reflective of the country side of your story, but I'm led to believe there's going to be a side B coming which focuses more on the coast.
Yeah, I do feel like they're like the two parts that kind of make up who I am musically. I grew up obviously in a house full of country music, particularly old country music, and then obviously introducing me to Keith, but I grew up like 20 minutes away from the beach too in my hometown, and so I spent a lot of time at the beach and a lot of time influenced by the kind of music of the time there as well. So I really want to kind of share that influence on the next thing. And we just started working on it. A couple weeks ago. And it's fun, man. We're playing around with ukuleles and stuff like that. And I was up in, I forget the name of it, but I went to the World Music Store here. It's one of those cool stores where you walk in and there's so many instruments you've never seen before and you just want to tinker with them all and see what the sounds are. But that's the kind of experience it is making this next thing, to try to work out how we represent that. But I don't really want to talk about it without showing you the music, but it'll be out soon, and hopefully you dig it.
Coming out of the pandemic, last year you got to tour and open for Brad Eldridge. So much time away from the stage. Tell me about how great it was to be back, that first show back, and particularly with someone like Brett, because he was actually in Belfast in May of this year, and something I've noticed about him is his audience are very quiet, respectful. They're hanging on every single word, you know.
Yeah, well, he's such an amazing singer and songwriter as well, and just fella. I mean, we had so much fun on the road, man. I'd kind of known him a little bit just because Nashville's small, and we'd run into him when we're walking our dogs sometimes. But yeah, I mean, we just became good mates on that tour. He texted me yesterday, actually. Hey, do you want to go play some pickleball? And I'm like, dude, I'm in Scotland, wherever we were yesterday. Man, that tour was great. Again, it was kind of bold at the time because that time was. It was really weird, you know. It was in between like the Delta and the Omicron moment, which is funny. I feel like historically we'll remember those moments, but and so we had to be like really careful because a lot of tours were going down and all that kind of stuff. And so I had so much respect for him to like say, no, we're gonna go do this, and we were like, we're gonna go do it with you, man. Let's go. And thankfully, I mean, we didn't cancel one show. All the shows were really fun, and as you say, it was a perfect kind of reintroduction to the live music thing. It was funny, man. I feel like us and the audiences were like remembering what it's like to do a show. Like it was this funny little like, oh, that's right, this is how this feels, and you could see people like, oh yeah, that's right. And like a few songs in, it would kind of click again, and I think I'll always remember that time really, really fondly.
So again, towards the end of this year, you're going to be opening some shows for Brad in Australia. You're also going to be one of the headliners at CMC Rocks, along with Brad and Kane Brown. I mean, that's going to be one hell of a homecoming, right?
It is, mate. It is. It's like, I always joke about this to Americans because, you know, we're traveling around America so much, and they'll have a hometown show or a home state show. And I feel like I've got a whole country full of hometowns when I go back to Australia. I really do. It's like this amazing kind of love I feel when we go back and play there. And that festival in Australia, CMC Rocks, is like, it's kind of the festival that grew country music in Australia. It's like similar to, I guess, what C2C does here, but there's this like, it's like a whole new thing now because of this festival. And the artists come down, they play it, and they tour around, and and people come to shows like they do here. They come to a Brad Paisley show and they realize, oh, who else is in this? And the same way I discovered Brad from Keith, they discover everything else. And I played the very first one. I think I was the first artist on the side stage. And so now, all these years later, to be finally headlining it is a huge deal. And all my family's coming up for it. And yeah, it's going to be a big night.
Just to highlight how big a star you are in Australia, your single Day Drunk spent 25 weeks at #1, and the last album, Things That We Drink To, was named Best Country Album at the 2019 ARIA Music Awards. It must be incredible to just have so much love and support coming from Australia, even, particularly now you've left there,
Yeah, it really means a lot. It does. And I wondered if it would go the other way, like when you leave and I remember the first time I came back wondering, like, oh, God, is anyone going to show up to these shows? And, like, I mean, all you really want to have happen is to be, accepted in your hometown, And so I got to have that feeling in 2017 right after we put out Kiss Somebody, we went back and did our first shows in Australia. And, man, it's just been crazier and crazier every time we've gone back. So super grateful for that.
You hadn't been back to Australia since 2019, but last Christmas yourself and Kelsea went back home and you surprised your family. They didn't know you were coming until you arrived at the house on Christmas morning. That must have been, emotional, but also you must have needed a minute to take in how much time had passed and how many things had changed that you'd missed.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the hardest thing about living on the other side of the world is just not being near your family or your old friends or the comfortable places that you grew up in, and I missed them so much, and my brother and sister just like did not waste any time. I in 2019 when I was there, I had one niece, and this Christmas I had 5 nieces and nephews. So yeah, they're all these babies that I got to meet for the first time, and the surprise was really cool but really hard to pull off because we had to lie to my mum for like 6 weeks, and she wanted us home for Christmas, and we were going, but we wanted it to be a surprise, so we had to like disappoint her for 6 weeks before we went back. But I mean, I'm sure you saw the video on social media, on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and it's worth it. The walk down the driveway on FaceTime and showing her own house, and her and dad and brother and sister running out the door. It was a really special moment.
I really love listening to you present on Countrywide Radio on Apple Music. I love the fact in particular that you'll take an act that's primarily big in maybe one part of the world, an act like, say, the Shires, big over here but not really anywhere else, and then you give them a global platform. Was that always the idea behind the programme in particular? How did the opportunity come up? Was being a radio presenter ever an ambition, or was it just the way the cards fell?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'll take that as a huge compliment from you. I have no idea what I'm doing when I'm hosting something like that. But yeah, man, I think it was probably 2 years ago, Apple came to me and they were like, hey, we want you to do a show. We're starting a radio station. We want you to do a show and do whatever you want. And I was like, all right.
I don't get any freedom.
Yeah. I mean, it's like almost too much freedom. They don't tell me anything about it, but they just let me do whatever. And there's a lady there named Madison who helps me like kind of find the new music, and I've spent more time on international flights probably than most country music artists do, and I was like, well, let me share that, let me share what I've been able to kind of discover. And yeah, it's about country music all over the world, and as you say, like people like the Shires, it's super fun to kind of introduce them to new people. And I mean, there's artists from South Africa and like everywhere, obviously Australia and New Zealand and all the English-speaking countries. But it's almost more interesting to find the non-English-speaking countries that have this love for country music and what country music means to them. And I guess the whole point of the show was to try to answer the question that I get asked all the time, which is like, wow, they have country music in Australia? What is country music in Australia? And so I've been trying to answer that question for as many countries as I can over the course of the last couple of years.
I'm only dwelling on this as you're talking there. It's really hitting me how much to come from a place like Australia and establish yourself in the modern American country scene is no mean feat. Do you see one day an act like the Shires or Ward Thomas or Catherine McGrath? Do you see an act from this part of the world managing to crack the States?
Absolutely. Catherine actually, when I was talking about my first time back in Australia, she came down and opened the shows for us. So I've been a big fan of hers for a long time. And yeah, all those artists are super talented. And I mean, I don't know how music works, but I feel like now more than ever, there's opportunity for anyone from anywhere to do anything. And those three acts that you mentioned are extremely talented. I'm sure there's tens, maybe hundreds more too that could do it from here. And especially with the kind of energy and community and fan base, whatever you want to call it, around country music here right now, it feels exciting. It feels like more than bubbling. It feels like it's catching fire, and that's a really exciting thing for people to support and sort of rally around. So, man, I look forward to that.
Tell your wife to hurry up and get back over here, because we love her. And yeah, man, as I say, continued success, and hopefully again it's not too long before you're back once more again.
Yeah, mate, for sure. I'll pass on the message. And man, I can't wait to come back. I texted my management last night. I was like, man, we need to plan our trip back here now. Let's come back here and do our own shows. So yeah, hopefully we can come back and yeah, see everyone again.